here today with Amber Butchart. Amber, how are you doing?
I'm great, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right, thank you. I love the fact we've just both been spinning, so we're both a bit exhausted.
Yeah,
But
I'm a bit flushed. Yeah,
we
all of
we
my
can be
blood
together on that, I think.
pressure.
Listen, let me ask, kind of the world of fashion. Um, why is it so important in this day and age, and why should it be at the centre of conversations? Kind of when people are worried about other stuff and the state of the world, etc., etc.
Well, fashion really is kind of integrated into the state of the world. It's an enormous economic force around the world. It's a sort of globalized industry for better or worse, quite often for worse. That can lead to obviously a lot of the issues that are sort of feeding into problems around the world. And also, we all get dressed every day. It's, no matter if you're into fashion or not, we all still wear clothes, we all still purchase clothes. And so, thinking about the decisions people make behind what they wear and how they shop are really, really important. And in terms of, some of the most pressing questions of the age, environmental issues, the climate
Mm.
crisis, fashion is a huge polluting industry. It's very, very important to be critical of this, to critique it, to try to make companies implement better practices, both environmentally and also, socially as well, in terms of the workforce that they are employing. So, from a number of reasons, I mean, I've not even got onto ideas around kind of design and aesthetics, but for a number of reasons that are embedded into all of our lives, it's very important to think about fashion.
And can I ask, kind of staying on the more positive element from my perspective, and then maybe I'll come back to the other stuff. But what's always interested me, and especially as I've got older in my age, and kind of now I do things my parents do by turning around to my kids and saying, "I remember I used to wear that 20 years ago." The fact that
Yeah,
trends come round and round.
yeah.
Why does it? Why do, is that how fashion exists, and that's always what it was? That actually everything's cyclical.
Yes. In a very short answer, I think yes. And yeah, you're right. I've absolutely just reached that point as well. When I was a teenager in the 1990s, my mum was so confused by the fact that I was scouring charity shops looking for clothes from the 70s. I was obsessed with flares, obsessed with things that she had worn in her youth. And
Yeah.
she did not comprehend it at all. And now I am looking around me at everyone shopping for 90s clothes, and it's that has certainly come full circle. But yeah, that notion of sort of cyclical fashions is something that we've really seen throughout history.
Mm.
Even back kind of in the early 19th century, people involved in fashion were getting ideas from history, from the past, inspired especially by the sort of classical Roman and Greek statues that were being excavated across Europe at the time. That was feeding into all kinds of ideas about fashion, about design in general, about architecture. So the cycles used to be much longer because obviously it used to take a lot longer to manufacture clothing pre-industrial revolution. And then things have really speeded up recently, which is why we've seen these hugely kind of shortened trend cycles. I remember the first time I got asked to sort of provide some quotes to a magazine article about fashion from the 2010s. And I was kind of thought, I don't know where we go from here. Is it
Yeah.
literally we're going to be like, last year's clothing is now in fashion again? Everything's in fashion. So, yeah, it's just generally a part of the process of the fashion system.
And so, from your perspective, when you look at what's going on and look at trends, how much do you predict what's going to come next? And how often are you right?
That's a good question. Well, I used to do this quite regularly. This used to be part of my job. I used to work as a vintage clothing buyer
Mm.
when I first started my career, but I was doing the trend forecasting for the vintage company. So working with old clothes, but thinking about current trends. And I mean, very much feeding into what we were just talking about in terms of fashion cycles, thinking
Mm.
about which particular eras were going to be fashionable, thinking about how you could convert contemporary trends into secondhand clothing. And that's something that is becoming more and more relevant as more and more people are shopping secondhand for a variety of reasons.
Mm.
But in terms of predicting, I try not to do too much forecasting anymore because you kind of never know where that's going to take you. But there
Yeah.
are kind of broader societal trends that you can, I mean, obviously, the COVID pandemic impacted hugely how people are dressing, how people are working from home, or sort of doing video calls from home. But that was also part of a much broader ongoing casualization of clothing. So that had kind of happened already, starting to happen, and then the pandemic just really sped it up. So that's what you often see, is that there are these broader trends, and then you'll have something that kind of crystallizes it and really speeds up the momentum.
So kind of fascinating, it provoked my question, which is around, will we go back then? Now, you just said you don't predict or anything like that, but kind of this casualization of clothing and the balance of like the workplace and actually how you should dress in the workplace and what you should be wearing on screen for a meeting or stuff like that. Are we just more relaxed as a society and actually almost less judgmental about what people are wearing, or are we, as we have always been, deep down?
I think both of those things can be true at once.
Okay.
I think we've become more relaxed, especially with things like workplace clothing.
Mm.
And, not only kind of working from home, but also if we think about massive industries like the tech industry, for example, it has a very different workplace culture, very different clothing codes. Like you think about Mark Zuckerberg in his hoodie,
Yes.
people like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, for better or worse, the way they're dressing is kind of infiltrating into the sort of culture of the companies and the people that they employ. And it's a much more casualized kind of way of dressing, that kind of Silicon Valley style. So certainly the idea that if you're going to work, you're wearing a suit is shifting in a lot of places.
Mm.
But that's not to say that these new, more casualized ways of dressing don't come with their own particular codes and their own particular judgments, to go
Yeah.
back to what you were saying about that. And I think if we, think about something like the popularity of a TV show like Succession, for example,
Mm.
and the clothing in that and the discussions that are happening about stealth wealth and how it's not about these big designer logos, but it's about still understanding those particular codes and being able to read the kind of codes of what people are wearing without these big flashy logos, then within those kinds of circles there are certainly judgments, there are certainly understandings of these codes, and that exists in other workplace
Yeah.
environments as well.
It's fascinating. One last question for you, because there's so much I could ask, but I just want to ask one. You spoke earlier about sustainability of fashion, but can I take you down a slightly different direction? Like, kind of over the last few years, I think kind of the prevalence of people's mental health and well-being and it has come to the forefront, which obviously, well, not obviously, but from my perspective, is totally ingrained in what you're wearing and how you feel and everything around that. How much is the fashion industry aware of that and the responsibility potentially about the projection of kind of what you are wearing and models and everything around that? How much has it changed over the last few years?
It has changed an enormous amount in terms of, I guess, the kind of diversity of bodies that we see within fashion imagery. There have been shifts for the better, a much more inclusive range of sizes, of ages, of ethnicities, of all of the problems that have been bound up in the fashion industry for at least kind of the last century, really, and certainly in some instances going back longer. But also, I think it's interesting thinking about clothing in general, fashion as a tool for potentially helping with mental health. There's been a big rise over the course of the pandemic and its aftermath of something called dopamine dressing, which was called that by a fashion psychologist. And it's this idea that if you're not feeling so good, there's potential sort of benefits to wearing bright colors, to wearing things that make you feel happy. It's almost like, sometimes people say if you smile, even if you're not feeling happy, it kind of, the muscles, it kind of can make you feel happy if you force yourself to do it. I guess it's a similar kind of idea, this idea that if you're dressing in really bright, colourful colours, patterns, it can have a mood boosting effect. And certainly I think if you're wearing those clothes outside, when I dress quite colourfully, people might come up to me and say, "Oh, you've brightened my day," or, "Oh, such lovely comments," and it makes you feel really happy. And it's not about body image and those kind of negative issues that certainly the fashion industry, even though it's got better, definitely can still perpetuate. But it's much more about what you're wearing, how that can make you feel good, and how that can boost your mood and the mood of people around you as well.
And on that note, as I look at my grey jumper and think to myself, tomorrow I've got to come in some bright colours and as far as that. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, and have a great day.
You too. Thanks so much, Nick. Take care.